Welcome everybody. It's great to be here with you this afternoon in this webinar about implementing a Methodist way of life. I know that many of you, when you registered your places, ticked a little box to tell us where you were on your journey, whether you were already really engaged, whether you were just finding out what a Methodist way.
Sorry, we can't hear you, Abby.
Can nobody hear me?
I can.
You can. Great. Okay. So I don't know who said that, but it sounds like it might be an issue on your end. I wondered, David, could you just send a quick message in the chat, because they won't be able to hear me talking right now, and just suggest them that they have a look at their settings. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm glad that most of you can hear me. That would be a very bad start if none of you could hear me at all. So whether this is the first time you've ever heard of a Methodist way of life, or whether you've been looking at it for months and months and months, it's really great to have you with us. And hopefully there's going to be something that you will learn today. So we're going to hear from Roger Walton, who came up with the idea for a Methodist way of life and has really been leading it over the past at least a year, if not longer, isn't it, Roger, I think? And then we're also going to be hearing from some storytellers who are going to talk about how they've been engaging with Methodist way of life in their church, their circuit, their small group. We'll go into some breakout rooms, so you'll be able to hear a little bit more of the stories, to discuss what it might mean for your context, to ask some questions. And then we'll be coming back together to hear from Gail Adcock, who's going to be talking about a Methodist way of life in all age situations and intergenerational, before finishing with some Q&A. If you've got any questions throughout the event, you can put these in the chat, but we often find if there's a lot of discussion going on in the chat, they can get a little bit lost. So what we'd love you to do is use something called Slido, and I'm just put the link to that in the chat now. So you can just click that link, and then you'll need to put in the code 611092. Oh, great, I'm glad you can hear us now, Lorraine, that's brilliant. And if you put that code into Slido, you'll then be able to ask any questions throughout the event that we'll come back to at the end. You'll also be able to vote. If somebody else asks a question and you think, oh, that's a really good question, I'd love to know the answer to that, then you can just give it a little tick on Slido, and then that helps us know to prioritize that question in the time that we have. So please do open up in your browsers, or you might have downloaded the app in advance, and ask questions at any time. But like I said, if that does sound a bit tricky, you're not sure how to do that, then do use the chat and we'll try to monitor that as well. Brilliant. So I'm gonna briefly pray for us. Prayer is the first commitment on a Methodist way of, well, it's the first one on the list. They're all equally important, but it is a commitment to pray daily. So it seems only appropriate that we begin this afternoon in prayer. Lord God, we do thank you for this time that we have together, and we thank you for the technology that is making it possible to continue to meet. And we do thank you that things are opening up, and we look forward to the day when we might be able to have an event like this in person. But Lord, we just commit to you the next hour and a half. We ask that you would open our hearts and open our minds to what we hear, that we would all go away from this session knowing something more about you, and inspired and encouraged to think about what the next steps might be for our community. Lord, I pray for each of our speakers, that as they look at the things that they prepared to say, that they would hear your voice and speak as you would guide them. Amen. Great. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Roger.
Well, good afternoon. I'm going to share a screen with you. So if this doesn't come up, occasionally that happens. If that doesn't come up, make sure I get a message to tell me that it's not come up. But here it goes from my side. Okay, I'm assuming that's okay. Can I get a thumbs up somewhere? Great. Okay, thank you. what I want to do at the beginning is simply read through the commitments of a Methodist way of life. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put them on the screen. If you want to, you can say these with me, but I think everybody's on mute, so it will be you saying it, but it won't come through and disturb other people. So let's just have a look at that. So the calling of the Methodist Church is to respond to the gospel of God, of good news in Christ, and to live out its discipleship in worship and mission. As far as we're able, with God's help, we will pray daily, we will worship with others regularly, we will look and listen for God in Scripture and the world, we will care for ourselves and those around us, we will learn more about our faith, we will practice hospitality and generosity. We will help people in our communities and beyond. We will care for creation and all God's gifts. We will challenge injustice. We will speak of the love of God. We will live in a way that draws others to Jesus. We will share our faith with others. May we be a blessing within and beyond God's church for the transformation of the world. What should be obvious as we have read that through is that a Methodist way of life focuses on Christian practices. It assumes belief, particularly that God has come among us to express God's love and to redeem us through Jesus Christ, and that in committing to this way, we are responding to that love. But it doesn't major on belief. It's not like the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed. It doesn't begin with the words "we believe" or "I believe." Rather, it sets out what we will do in Christian living every day. So it's probably good for us to reflect for a moment or two on the relationship between belief and practice. Now, this is a good place to start. This is a text from Ephesians. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are what God has made us, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand to be our way of life. There are 3 verses here, but there are 2 affirmations. Verses 8 and 9 is what you might call straight Protestant theology. We are saved by grace through faith. It's God's grace which saves us, and we respond to that by having faith in what God has done. It's not something we can achieve for ourselves. It's given to us out of God's generosity. But the second affirmation is in the last verse. We are what God has made us, created in Christ for good works. So we can't get there by good works, it seems, but we are created for good works. So it seems that God's grace in Jesus Christ releases us to live a way of life which is full of good works, works which create good in the world. So belief and practice belong together. Let's have a look at that. This is the work of Elaine Heath, and she has suggested that belief and practice belong together a bit like a stool and its legs. This is what she says. Let's imagine discipleship formation as a 3-legged stool. The flat part of the stool you sit on is doctrine. The 3 legs that support the seat are sets of practices. One leg is a set of practices called prayer. Another leg is a set of practices called hospitality. The 3rd leg is a set of practices called justice. The entire stool is able to support the weight of human life individually and corporately when all the pieces are in place. It's no good just having legs. You need the legs and the seat. It's no good just having the seat. You need to have both parts to make this work. In a Methodist way of life, we would say there are 4 legs to this stool. So it's worship, learning and caring, service and evangelism. The point really is the same, that the practices are really important, and without the practices, doctrine can be lifeless. Yeah, I have a stool in my kitchen. It's a bit low for me to sit on. I'm quite a tall person. I don't use it very much. Occasionally when my grandchildren come, they sit on it. It's much better height for them. But I use the stool, which is a 4-legged stool, to climb on, to get things from the top cupboard, to fix things. It is a useful thing because it has legs and the seat together. So they belong together, but what's the relationship between belief and practice? Let me offer you 2 models. They're not competing models. You don't have to choose one over the other. Rather, they're slightly different ways of looking at the same thing, how belief and practice belong together. The first is that practices carry implicit beliefs. One of the new branches of theology has been what's called practical theology, which begins from real life, real action, and then thinks about what that might mean in theological terms. And one of the insights of practical theology is to say to us that all the practices that we do, all the actions we take in the world, carry some kind of message, some kind of belief system within them. So if you pray daily, you worship regularly, you look and listen for God in the scriptures and in the world, you are implicitly saying there is a God. There is a God who is active in the world, and God seeks and welcomes personal intimacy with each of us. Those practices carry belief. And if you say, oh, we're going to practice hospitality and generosity, and we're going to challenge injustice, we are reflecting our convictions that the God whom we believe in makes room for all, is endlessly generous, and wants a world of justice and peace. So our practices are carrying our beliefs with us. It's a bit like James puts it in his epistle. He says, someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works. But I say, by my works, I will show you my faith. I put up here a lovely quote from Bishop Ryle writing about holiness about 150 years ago. He wrote this: our lives will be always either doing good or harm to those who see them. They are a silent sermon which all can read. Far more is done for Christ's kingdom by the holy living of believers than we are aware of. Our practices, the way we live, carry our beliefs. But there's a second understanding of how the relationship between the two, and that's what I would call the rhythm of belief and practice. Elaine Heath, whom I quoted a few moments ago, said slightly controversially at ECG a couple of years ago, gathering of Christians there, that if you had to choose where to start, you should start with practices, not belief. Now, I think this was on the basis of what Peter Bowler said to John Wesley. So that Peter Bowler was a Moravian speaking to John Wesley at a very low period in his life before his heart was strangely warmed. He said, preach faith until you have it. And when you have it, you will preach faith. In other words, act as if it's true and you will discover its truth. Now, sometimes people think that you can think your way into new ways of acting. But for many people, they act their way into new ways of thinking or believing. Let's just stay with John Wesley for a moment or two. There's no doubt at all that John Wesley subscribed to the idea that we're being saved by faith, by grace working through faith. We don't have to lay out the evidence for that. It's through all his sermons and his writings and his preaching. It's like the letters through a stick of rock. At the same time, he practiced and advocated a way of life for Methodists, which was called engaging in works. He used that term quite extensively. And he divided the idea of works into two groups: works of piety, prayer, communion, fellowship, and works of mercy, acts of kindness, visiting the sick, collecting for the poor, campaigning against slavery, acts of piety and acts of mercy. Now, it's sometimes assumed that the works of piety were the means of grace to empower the works of mercy. And there's some truth in that, I think. In Finding the Way, I suggested that it's like breathing in and out. We breathe in through our prayer, our communion, our fellowship, our Christian community, and we breathe out in our actions in the world. But I think John Wesley meant something slightly more than this, and slightly different from the way that's phrased. So Wesley was suggesting that works of mercy might also be a place where you discovered grace. So works of piety, certainly, go in prayer, go in communion, share in fellowship, those are the means of grace. But he also went on to say that works of mercy can also be an encounter point with God. He writes this in one place: that are there no other means than these whereby God is pleased, frequently, yea, ordinarily, to convey his grace to them that either love or fear him? Surely there are works of mercy as well as works of piety, which are real means of grace, and those that neglect them do not receive the grace which otherwise they might, yea, and they lose by continuing neglect the grace which they have received. So actually there's more of a flow than we think. Within the works of piety and mercy, the grace flows through piety, but it also comes to us in mercy. Works flow from grace, but are also a means of grace. So there's a kind of rhythm of belief and practice which operates for us. That whether we start with belief and then put it into practice, or we start with practice and we understand and explore our belief, they reinforce each other. And it's not just a circle, it's an ongoing development, so that belief will strengthen practice, practice will deepen our belief, belief will put us into other places, and practices will make us work it out in real life. There's a continual flow. They are feeding and reinforcing one another. Belief and practice go together. Works do not save us, only God can do that, but they are a way of growing in faith. That's what I wanted to say to get us started. And I think now we're going to move to hear from some people who've been working with a Methodist way of life, and we may get some more insight. Abi.
Brilliant. Thank you, Roger, for that really helpful introduction to the ideas of rhythms and practices and beliefs. Really great. So yeah, as Roger said, we're going to hear now from some people who have been engaging already with a Methodist way of life. I realise I neglected to say at the start, we are recording this, so if you don't want to be recorded, do just turn your camera off. I also failed to introduce me. I know many of you have been in webinars with me before, but if you don't know, my name's Abi. I'm a member of the Evangelism and Growth team, and I work on discipleship and faith formation, which includes a Methodist way of life. So that's who I am. So we're going to start with John and Debbie. So David, if you could just add them to the spotlights. And then John and Debbie, just a couple of minutes to talk about how you've engaged with the Methodist way of life.
Yeah, it's great. Welcome. My name's John Hayes. I'm a Superintendent Minister in Tower Hamlet Circuit, and it is my absolute pleasure to be here with Debbie Brady, who looks after our Zacchaeus project and has been joining in with one of the sessions that we run on Methodist way of life. I'm going to do a bit of an intro, and if you want to hear some really exciting stuff from Debbie, you'll have to come along to our group. So Debbie is Debbie's a key member of our staff team in Tower Hamlets. Methodist way of life was something we engaged with fairly quickly because we like to have discipleship groups, and it seemed, particularly in the lockdown, to be quite a good way of doing this. So we gathered together people who might have come to a group or may not have come to a group, gather them together on Zoom, and we run through the Methodist way of life card and commitments and questions, and sometimes each week we'll pick out one, or sometimes we'll go for what's been challenging people during that week, but either based on their experience or on something that's on the card. So we've tried to do it that way. And we've really been working with a group maybe of about up to sort of 12 to 13 people, but coming from all sorts of different parts of the church community, including some of our projects in Tower Hamlets. So it really is a group of people who you wouldn't normally gather together. It's a massive range of Christian experience, some of which steeped in Methodism and understand it back to front, and I'd like them to explain it to me. But then there are others who have had very little contact with Methodist theology or discussion, but have been involved or connected with the Methodist Church for some time. So they may come from a Pentecostal background, for example. So we've had a wide range of people, and all of which seem to be able to engage with this, with the way of life within our discussions and reflections. So it seems to be a really helpful tool for connecting people at different stages, and a real encouragement as we journey together week by week, most of the time, or not all of the time, but week by week, helping people along that way. So that's what we've kind of been doing within the circuit, and we've got some stories or some examples of how people have engaged with that and what they've done, and I know Debbie's got some really good stuff to share within that, but that's probably reached the end of our time to do the intro, so I don't want to tread on any more toes.
Great, that's perfect. Thank you, John and Debbie. So you're going to have the opportunity to choose which breakout room you'd like to go to. There are going to be 4. So if you'd like to hear more about John and Debbie and what they've been up to and have some chat there, then you can pick the breakout room that they'll be in. I think we're going to hear from Phil next.
Thank you, Abby. Good afternoon, everyone. Phil Goff, I'm a Superintendent Minister in Chorley and Leyland Circuit in Lancashire. And I have got Linda with me this afternoon, Linda White, who is in one of our small Methodist Way of Life groups. And so I'd love you to hear a bit from Linda about her own experience of being in a Methodist Way of Life small group. In our circuit, one of our priorities is a spiritual growth plan. And we've found the Methodist Way of Life to be a really helpful tool to look at people's spiritual growth. How do you take somebody who's brand new to exploring faith to right through to the other end where they're really maturing in their faith? And off the back of a series on covenant, what it means to be a covenant discipleship church in January, we're currently going through a series taking the whole circuit on a journey through the Methodist Way of Life, with Sunday worship tied in with midweek groups, with daily prayer, morning and evening prayer, all tied in with the themes. And we also have a large schools presence in our circuit. We have 4 Methodist or Methodist Church of England schools, and just recently engaging some of the schools in a Methodist Way of Life, helping us to look at what we're learning about our faith, which is in the second leg of the stool, learning and caring. So I've got some exciting things to talk about engaging the school, but particularly want you to hear from Linda, who's part of one of our small groups, about how it's helped having all the online content that we have at the moment. So if you're not joining John and Debbie, you'd be very welcome to join Phil and Linda, or whoever's next, Abby.
Great, thank you, Phil. Oh gosh, that's going to be a tough choice for people, I can see already. Don't forget, if you've got any questions for any of these people that you think, oh, I'm not going to be in their room, but I'd love to know what they think about X, then do put those questions on Slido and we can come back to them at the end. Michael, you're up next.
Great, thanks Abby, and good afternoon everyone. My name's Michael and I'm a Learning and Development Officer in the Eastern region of the Learning Network. And I first encountered a Methodist Way of Life actually in my first 2 weeks on the job. I was at a gathering with my colleagues, and a draft version of it was kind of introduced to us for our reflections and comment really. And I was instantly a fan. I'm always a big believer in these sorts of simple, memorable frameworks that I think can kind of help us sharpen and hone our discipleship. So my major engagement with a Methodist Way of Life has been over the last 6 months or so. I'm aligned to the Northampton district, and they have chosen to make a Methodist Way of Life a kind of key district priority for them. And so the chair of the district, Helen Cameron, asked me if I could offer each individual circuit just some bespoke input about a Methodist Way of Life, and kind of work with them to think through, what does it look like for us to embed these commitments in your corporate life together. So over the last 6 months or so, I've done a whole variety of things, from just basic introductions, so actually what the framework is and kind of how you might use it and some of the tools, etc. I've done that with circuit meetings, leadership teams, local preachers, small group leaders. I've also run series and sessions on the individual commitments themselves, helping people to think through actually, how do you reflect on this? What does this look like in your life already? What could this look like in your life, both individually and corporately? So I've done things on subjects like worship, prayer, Bible study, hospitality, community engagement, evangelism, all of those sorts of things. And I've really enjoyed the last 6 months worth of work, I have to say. I feel like I've had 6 months of almost continually meditating on these different principles of what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus in the 21st century. And I've become even more convinced of its value as a framework for the church, as a galvanizing framework, I think, for communities and small groups. I think it offers a basis of vision, conversation, exploration, accountability, all those things. I think it's really useful as an underpinning framework for us, almost a hook for us to hang all aspects of our kind of individual and communal life together on. And there's a strategic framework actually helping churches think through and evaluate and develop and sharpen what they do. So if you want to join me in my breakout space, I'm basically really happy to talk through the various different sorts of sessions that I've run, how my thinking around the material has grown and deepened as I continually engage with it, and also to talk through some of the questions and frustrations and concerns I've encountered in other people as I've been involved in introducing people to it, because I think there's as much learning from the questions that people raise about it as there is from kind of just looking at the material and taking it at face value. So that's what I'm happy to look at in my space, if you don't want to go with the other wonderful people on the call.
Great, thanks, Michael. And if you're listening and thinking, oh gosh, I don't know which breakout room to choose, they all sound so great, then what I encourage you to do is just to wait a minute and see which rooms fill up, and then go to a room that maybe has slightly less people in, or if actually you just don't know how to put yourself in a breakout room, then don't worry at all, just stay in the main room, and David and I can put you into a breakout room as well, so please don't worry about that. Okay, last but by no means least, Richard. We can't hear you, Richard.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go, perfect.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Richard Vincent and I live just outside Maidstone in Kent. I attend the Union Street Methodist Church, which is part of the North Kent Methodist Circuit in the South East District. I'm a local preacher, son of the manse 75 years ago, and attended Truro School, a Methodist boarding school down in Truro in Cornwall, from 9 until I was 18. I first met the Methodist way of life when one of our ministers signposted me to it on the website, and a bit like the previous speaker was saying, I was immediately taken with it. It rang bells with me, and I realised that it was a significant document. And I think the most important thing for me was that it reminds us how to be a Methodist, helps us to be accountable for ourselves in our way of life, but also for others. And I sometimes think that's something that we've lost a little from the Wesley days of classes. I'm very passionate about small groups, and particularly about that idea of accountability. And if we want to share our beliefs and way of life, it's important that we know it inside out. And again, I sort of feel that people have lost that basic knowledge that they can convey simply to other people, and that's part of the problem we have in sharing faith. How to use it effectively in the spiritual life of our society? Well, it's ideal for small groups. My title is small groups, but everybody else seems to have talked about that already. So, but I really do think that the Methodist way of life works in a small group, and it works particularly when you think about accountability. I use it mainly in a lectio divina way of running a small group, so that it's mainly discussion and not much input from myself, and then deal with questions and ideas as they come up. We've also run in our circuit a circuit Lent study on the Methodist way of life, which I led, and we had about 30 people. We broke them up into small groups. The interesting challenge was we tried to keep them in the same group for all 6 sessions, and that was a bit of a challenge with Zoom, but it worked. But the idea of a leader and a small group working together over a period of time worked very well, I think, and they all seemed to learn something from it. And then I think, where are we going with it? Well, I think the most important thing in our circuit is that we need to train small group leaders. We've got lots of Bible study and lots of all sorts of other things, but few people who think about accountability and running small groups in that sort of way. We need to continue to build momentum with any project. Momentum is so important. And recently the new catechism has come out, and I think that dovetails very nicely with deeper spirituality, which the Methodist way of life leads us into. So I think it's really great that all this material is coming out to help us. And lastly, the most important thing is it gives people confidence, and that's what I'm about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you all. So hopefully that's given you a little flavour of some different stories and ways of engaging with a Methodist way of life, which might have already given you some ideas. We're going to go now into breakout rooms. So as I said, you've got the opportunity to choose which breakout room you would like to go to, whether you'd like to hear from John and Debbie, Phil and Linda, Michael, or from Richard. And I do encourage you, so there are about 40 people. So if you look at one breakout room and it looks like there's already quite a few people in there, then I encourage you just to have a look at a different one, because it just means that there's more conversation that's able to happen if we space the groups out a little bit. So we've got about 20 minutes in those breakout rooms, and then we'll have a 10-minute break. So what will happen is you'll stay in the breakout rooms during the break, and then when we all come back together after the break, we'll come back into the main room. So breakout room leaders, if you could just at about 25 past give people that option to go grab coffee, tea, whatever it might be. Don't forget, you can ask any questions for any of the speakers throughout the event on Slido. Thank you to those that already have done, and the code is in the chat just there. And I think that's it from me. So I think, David, if you could launch the breakout rooms. So you should have a little notification pop up at the bottom of your screen to join a breakout room. And you'll see there you've got the names, Phil, John, Michael, Richard. Pick which one you like. If you don't know which one to go to, you want us to do it, just stay in the main room. But we will see you all at about 25 to. I think we're almost all back. I'll just give it another minute.
Aye.
Catherine's put in the chat, this way of life reminds me of the Iona community rule for members of the community. Yeah, it's a great thought, Catherine. Yeah, and there's a lot of ways of life, isn't there? I know that I don't know if we've got any deacons on the call, but I know that deacons have a rule of life as well that they follow, which is really brilliant. So anybody else, if you've got any key learnings or thoughts you want to put in the chat and share with us, please do, while we just wait for the last couple of people. Richard's put his contact details in the chat for his group if anybody's interested in following up on him. Thank you, Richard. So we just realized I haven't spotlighted myself. That's very bad of me. There we go. So we're going to hear now from Gail Adcock, who's a member of the Children, Youth and Family team, and does a lot of work on intergenerational ministry, intergenerational discipleship, intergenerational mission, intergenerational everything, I think, really, Gail, isn't it? And so it's really great to have Gail with us talking about what a Methodist way of life means in an all-age intergenerational context. So passing over to you.
Thanks, Abby. It's really good to be able to explore something about what Methodist way of life looks like for all ages in terms of our faith, our discipleship, our worship and our mission as well. And there's something significant for us when we are able, as the body of Christ, as a community of people of different ages. It's almost a unique experience in society when we are often separated by age in our contemporary times. And we tend to spend less and less time in intergenerational settings. And I was also reflecting that our experience during the pandemic seems to have reinforced those notions of separation along generational lines, because we haven't been able to meet. There are many grandparents who haven't been able to see their grandchildren. The rollout of the vaccine has been along age and generational as well as health lines. And so we're very, very aware of our age and our sense of relationship to those other generations around us. And I'm feeling that events of this past year have reinforced our sense of disconnection across generations, and that there's a place here for the church to try and reignite the richness of what exists when we are in community, when we gather different generations together. When young and old and everyone in between is able to talk of faith, to ask questions, to discover ways to serve God and express faith, we all benefit. So this isn't a call to show children and young people how to do faith, believing that perhaps the older we are, the more answers we have. Instead, it's a recognition that we all have a contribution to make and that we can grow and learn from one another. Now, I find that a mighty relief, if I'm honest. It liberates me as a disciple to be able to continue growing as I seek to follow Jesus. It means that as we stand alongside each other, equally loved and called by God, we stand to gain so much by mutually supporting and encouraging one another. I want to just share my screen now and show you a quote that is from the book Intergenerate. And this book, edited by Holly Catterton Allen, is a collection of essays and thoughts on intergenerational life from various people. And it says here on page 23 that for intergenerational ministry to be truly transformative, it needs to be more fully understood, more deeply embraced, more genuinely modelled, and more intentionally facilitated, and more strategically embedded into the culture of faith communities. Now, they are my words that I have put into bold there, just in case you were wondering. Those words don't exist in bold in the documents, in the book itself. But I want to just go through those 4 words, actually, the words that I've highlighted, and I would really want to urge us to reflect on those and to consider what they might mean for us. So if we're thinking about being understood, about how being intergenerational is more than simply having people of different ages in the same room. It's about that meaningful engagement. So we build friendships, we get to know each other beyond that surface level of saying to each other that we feel fine, for instance. It's about developing understanding at a deeper level between people of different ages. There can sometimes be misunderstandings across generations in church, and I believe that if we knew each other better, those things may often be less of an issue. And then what does it mean if we talk about it being deeply embraced? Well, we need to welcome this dimension of our life together as church, because if not all generations are represented in our churches, then this means simply that whoever is the youngest there or the oldest is talking about how do we, across those generations, build those relationships and get to know each other well. Some of our churches may have people in their 40s through to their 80s. So we're not assuming that this includes children and young people, but it's about looking at the breadth of generations and how we build understanding between them all. Thirdly, how are we modelling it? How are we finding ways for our life as church to demonstrate what meaningful intergenerational relationships look like? How are people of all ages included throughout the life of the church, listened to and responded to? We need to model that we take seriously the views and contributions of people of all ages. It means honest conversations about whether we favour particular age groups within the church. Are we able to offer opportunities where everybody can voice the things that matter to them? And so there's a really big important thing for us in modelling that well. And then finally, if we're talking about facilitating it, which is that aspect of hand-holding with people to help them become more confident in an intergenerational setting. So alongside modelling, we want opportunities for people to actively join in. Church life needs to include times when we can put our toe in the water, be bold and build confidence through occasions to build up those intergenerational connections. That may mean just a few minutes here and there that we offer over time, that we build up, so that we have safe spaces where if some of us don't feel sure or very comfortable, that there is support available to help us along the way. Now, depending on where you may reflect and believe that your own church is in terms of intergenerational life, it may be worth you exploring one of those elements further. So does your church need to better understand what it means to be intergenerational? If your church does understand, are you fully embracing it? What steps might you need to take to do that? In what ways is being intergenerational modelled through the life of your church? How do you help people get to know one another in those times when you gather? And what opportunities are there to facilitate times for those age groups to build that empathy and mutual understanding? And this is about looking at the entire breadth of church life. So beyond Sunday services, looking at all that we do as a church and identifying where the opportunities for us to be intergenerational are. Now, I want to take us through those 4 aspects of a Methodist way of life and to reflect on those in terms of being intergenerational community. So take a look. I've created this hopefully on a diagram which is helpful for us to see in terms of worship, learning and caring, service and evangelism. So when we're worshipping, this is more than thinking about we just need to have a family service and that's where we're able to worship God together. It's about creating spaces where we can all worship alongside each other with different ages of people contributing, leading and participating. In my own experience, I was very grateful in the Methodist Church that our youth leaders, our church leaders took risks in allowing us and encouraging us as young people to come and join in and participate and lead. And they were very, very supportive in doing that. And I would encourage us all to find ways to do it. Learning and caring, I think, can often have a focus around those milestones that exist often in life, those times perhaps in terms of anniversaries, in terms of our shared human experience, where we can express care for each other, we can build generational empathy. And so it's about recognizing the moments of joy, of celebration. It builds a sense of understanding of people in different stages and seasons of life. But it's also about standing alongside one another when we may be lamenting, when we may be grieving, and build empathy there as well. In terms of service, it's about exploring ways, if we're going to include children and young people, that those things are accessible to them. Do we offer ways for families to be a part of that? Can we work together to explore sharing faith in the different places that we find ourselves, for instance? And then finally, evangelism is around how we talk as different ages about what faith means to us, to give us confidence. And so that a young person, an older person can talk about that, can help facilitate one another's language so that we can find the words that are going to be comfortable and useful for us when we are out in the world doing what we do, mixing with people of different ages in different places. Now, there's a fabulous resource that I just wanted to flag and highlight to you, which I don't know how many of you have come across, these amazing conversation cards that are available from Methodist Publishing. Now, I am hugely evangelical about this resource, partly because I was involved in the development of it. But I'm just going to hold up to the screen if I stop sharing. This is what they look like. They're an A5 pack of cards, and each card has these wonderful hand-drawn illustrations on, and it's kind of set in a generic town or location or community, and there are lots of little details included in these illustrations which make them really fascinating for looking at. And that's the big purpose of them, is to spend time looking and observing and just having a really good eye as to what is happening in the various pictures. And then the cards offer you questions to explore. Now, you could use this in an all-age setting. You could choose some of these questions. You could choose one of the areas to explore in more detail and focus upon that one in particular. And what I'm pleased to say is that we're in the process of developing some all-age worship resources to be used that involve these cards. And so that would be a great way for you, once that's published in a few months' time, to be able to use these cards, hopefully in physical settings when you're actually able to gather people. They could be used in small groups. They could be used as families in a home setting or in a household. And there's also a resource that's available as a PowerPoint presentation, so you can use those on a screen if you're doing things on Zoom, if you're gathering people in digital spaces, to also explore these things. And it's very much about how do we walk through the rest of our life beyond a Sunday, taking God and being people of faith in our lives beyond church buildings. So you can get those from Methodist Publishing. They are £3.99 a set, and they come heartily recommended from me. Abi, that was everything that I had to say.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gail. I think that was a really helpful introduction to how a Methodist way of life might be used in an intergenerational context. And I'm sure if you've got more questions, I'm sure you can get in touch with Gail, and she'd be happy to chat more about that. Gail, would it be okay if you send me those slides and then I can distribute them to everyone? Would that be fine? Great. So if you wanted to look at those more, then we'll send those around. We've got 10 minutes left, so yeah, if you do need to pop off to other meetings, then please do. It's been lovely to see you. But we are going to spend the next 10 minutes in a bit of Q&A. I might take us just 5 minutes over, just so we get in a few questions, but no more than that. So if I'm just going to invite David, if you can add the rest of the speakers to the spotlight. I'm gonna. How are we going? As everyone comes up. Oh, I've lost Gail. Gail, I had you a minute ago and now you've gone.
I'm here. I'm still here. There we go.
Is it helpful if we speak so we can be seen? There we go.
Let's help bring everyone up. Is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? Who are we waiting for? Linda, can we bring up Linda and Richard as well? So just while they join us, I'm going to start with the first question. So thank you to those who've submitted questions. And panel, if we could just keep answers brief, just so that we can fit in as much as possible, that would be great. But the first question, we've got a couple of things about new places for new people. I always do that the wrong way around. And if I'm looking at my phone, it's just because I've got the questions on my phone. I promise I'm not reading my texts. So new places for new people. How does this work? For people that are yet to belong, yet to believe, do we adapt the church language or do we keep it? And also a comment that new places for new people could also be new places for existing people. I'm going to be really school. Panel, do you want to just raise your hand if you've got something you'd like to say on that particular comment and question? Go on, Roger.
Thank you for the question. The new places for new people is a very exciting development, and there are lots of very interesting and new communities forming focused in Christ. And I think that it kind of the way in which a Methodist way of life might work with that might depend on the place and the people. I know many of the new communities that are emerging are looking for a way of focusing their life. And I think a Methodist way of life can help with that. I think it needs to be sensitively introduced for people who are wholly new, but there's lots in it which is very simple and very easy to engage with. You know, for people who are beginning to join, to know a little bit about their passions. You know, do they care for the environment? Are they concerned about climate stuff? That's the thing we're committed to. Are there issues around justice? You know, the kind of racism that's continuing to tear our societies apart. We're for challenging injustice. I think there are connection points, and it may be that that's the place to start with people, and let it build from there.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that particular question? Michael, I saw your hand first, and then Phil, very briefly.
Just very quickly, particularly in terms of, you know, thinking through how are we engaging with new people and reaching new people via these new places. I do think there's something beautiful about what a Methodist way of life does in terms of, as far as I'm concerned, the gospel is that God is committed to God's world, and God is committed to engaging with God's world through God's people. And actually, therefore, having a very, very simple framework where you say to people, actually, we believe this is the kind of life that you were designed for. And this is the kind of life that will, you know, bring you, not just you life, but life to the world around you. So I think you may want to adapt the language around some of that in terms of how you introduce it to people. And, you know, you may have to do a fair bit of exploration. But I think there is something beautiful about this actually as an evangelistic tool for saying, you know, this is how God wants to express God's care for his creation. And we participate in that. This is how. And I think there's an awful lot of people out there who are looking for that kind of messaging. So I think it's a really nice thing to add into kind of our gospel messaging.
Phil, was there something brief you wanted to add to that?
And really, just to add on what Roger was saying, I think it might just be choosing where you start in the Methodist way of life. I would have said the same as Roger: injustice, environment, or looking at something like hospitality and generosity, or caring for those around us. They're things that the majority of the population are passionate about, and they might be a helpful starting point, rather than worshipping with others regularly when we're trying to work out what our new community is going to look like.
Thank you. I went to the next question, maybe Debbie or Linda, I don't know, this might be one that you're interested in. How do you ensure, when you're looking at all the different practices and commitments of a Methodist way of life, that you don't only do one area, but you're being holistic, but at the same time, you don't want to be overwhelmed by trying to do everything at once? What been your experience on that?
Go
on, Debbie.
You got it. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that within our group, it's we've had people from obviously the Zacchaeus community come in. So some people that are not Methodists may or may not have a faith, So we find that we kind of stick on one topic because there's so many people have got different views and different ideas of actually what that means. So I think John mentioned earlier about forgiveness. So we kind of looked at how we look and care for people around us, and so that kind of generated so much stuff. So for us, we can kind of quite easily stick onto one topic rather than going all through them. But we've actually found, because we've been doing it for so long, you know, like you've kind of gone through everything, you think, okay, I've done that now. But every single group, even if you're approaching the same subject, there's different conversations that come up, stuff that you've not even considered previously. So it is like a live document, isn't it, that you can use constantly. And we've really been blessed by it. You know, even those that are confess to not having a faith, 6 months down the line, they're actually you know, saying the prayer and reading the card as well. So it's been really, really encouraging. And you know, it's been such a lovely safe space for people to do that. It's been a non-judgmental group, and you know, people have, you know, we don't know what the background of people, so it's great that we're able to listen without having our biases. So that's been really good.
Thank you. Linda, what did you want to add?
I was just going to say that we did the Alpha course twice in the last 12 months, but it's amazing how much you can learn the second time round that you didn't learn the first time round. It's a different group of people and you see it from a different perspective. So I imagine if you were to do it again in another 12 months, 2 years, whatever, you'd see something else again because you've got a different input. But it's all happening at the moment though, isn't it? I mean, it's Pentecost coming up with, so we've had Easter, we've had so much going on. It's been quite, yeah, it's been a good time. And learned an awful lot in a short space of time. So.
Richard, I could see your hand was up, and then I'm going to pose the next question, I think, to John.
Okay, I was just going to say, and it slightly crosses over into the previous conversation, that if you have a small group that is using the Methodist way of life as part of its accountability and learning process, then when you get a new face, ideally one of your small group, or maybe two of them, will mentor the new face with the aim of bringing them eventually into a small group, if not that small group. And then within the small group, rather than trying to tell them what they need to know, actually do it the other way around and ask them what they need to know and what they want to know, and to respond to their needs rather than to just keep giving them stuff and hoping that some of it is what they want. So I think very much empathy is at the heart of evangelism.
I love that. Thank you, Richard. Okay, sorry, I know, Mike, your hand was up, but I'm going to ask the next question, then maybe we'll come back to you if we get time. So, John, I think next question I'm going to pose to you. In your experience of delivering a Methodist way of life, what are our strengths as Methodists, and what perhaps are our weaknesses?
Well, I guess that's a variable question, isn't it, dependent upon, but in my experience with Methodist way of life, the biggest strength I've seen as Methodists is our openness, our willingness to be alongside people of very, very different experiences. We're not asking for certain standards. It's that openness. That's a real strength that I've experienced in our experience of Methodist way of life. In terms of the weaknesses, I'm gonna sort of suggest that I think one of the biggest challenges with these groups is the appropriate confidentiality. What I mean by appropriate, I think, is it's not meant that nothing can be shared out of these groups. We've been sharing things out of these groups today, but it's not been attributable necessarily, apart from our own comments. But it's much more that I think this sort of sense of the sense of sharing your shared experience and people being able to use that is an important part but still maintaining, having that safe space or that ability to be able to share something important or something deep. I think there's quite a number of people who, in our church, who have been injured in quite serious ways in the past by certain things that were not meant to be shared more widely and have been. And I suppose the weakness it's not been something that's happened, but is something that I'm mindful of, that actually it is quite, it works best when you're sharing deep. But actually then you require a lot of responsibility for people with a whole variety of experiences of what confidential actually means, you know, or what. So I think it's a kind of my sense is it's not something we've experienced, but that's been my concern, I think. So I'd express it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, when I saw this question come up, I was really keen to answer it because one of the things I found really interesting going through various kind of working through this material with different circuits is that I think sometimes what people's perceived strengths and weaknesses are and what their actual strengths and weaknesses are quite different. And I think sometimes the perceived strengths and weaknesses are built around those things that what can we overtly point to what we do. So when it comes to things like, you know, we will worship with others regularly, I think people go, yeah, we're really strong at that. But then I always want to, you know, this is kind of like my tendency as a development officer is to want to say, well, what does that look like? What form does your worship take? And how does that relate to a biblical understanding of worship, etc.? And generally speaking, I think lots of circuits have said things like, we're really weak at the evangelism piece. And then me wanting to say, well, how do you practice evangelism? What are the aspects of your church life that are built around that? And is the reason that you feel like you're weak at it probably because you're not necessarily resourcing that properly and putting your eggs into that basket? And a helpful reflective tool is to imagine if each of the commitments are like a hook, and then you had every aspect of kind of your church life, what hooks have nothing on and what hooks are massively overburdened. And actually, what hooks have you hung quite a lot on, but actually it's kind of a bit rusty. And actually trying to use that as a mental framework for helping people think through these things is really helpful. I wouldn't want to speak in terms of what our Methodists good at and what Methodists bad at, but certainly using this as an evaluative framework for what's your context good at and what's your context weak at, and probing those answers rather than just taking them at face value.
Brilliant. Thank you. We are, unfortunately, we are out of time. It is almost 3:05. I wish we could go on talking, because I feel like there's so much wisdom and so much interesting stuff here. And it's thank you to those that have already put in the comments how helpful this session has been. That's really good to know. Thank you so much to all of our speakers and for all the contribution you brought today. And if I had time, I would spotlight you all, but we've only got a minute left, so I think you'll be fine to stay there. I'm just going to put in the chat a couple of links. So first of all, so Gail's already put in a link to Methodist Publishing, but also just a link there to the Methodist website page on A Methodist Way of Life that's got some information, and also will link you through to all of the resources as well. There's also a feedback form. We'd love you to just take 3 minutes to fill that in, to let us know how today was. You know, let us know whether we should run something like this again, or if there's some other way that we can help to resource you to engage with A Methodist Way of Life. And finally, just my email address if you want to chat more about A Methodist Way of Life, discipleship, small groups, then I would love to do that, and please do be in touch. So you can copy and paste those, or you can hit the 3 dots and save the chat as well, so you've got those there. And hopefully you all received an email from me yesterday, so you got my email address as well. My voice is going really croaky, so I think that is definitely a sign that it's time to end. So thank you all so much for being with us today. Really wish you all the best for everything that you're doing with the Methodist Way of Life. Do keep in touch and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.